All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dan Binkin with UNI's Advanced Iowa program. We are coming at you live from dual location today here in Cedar Falls, where it's a balmy 20-something degrees. And Matt Sargent with Midwest Growth Partners is also joining us, and he is currently down in Des Moines, where I'm guessing it's a little warmer and a little sunnier because it always seems to be. Matt, thank you for joining us today. Also, before I forget, Matt is a proud UNI alumni. I found that out after talking to him, so that was a nice bonus for us to have another alumni of UNI's College of Business here with us as we do this webinar today. Matt, we're excited to have you here. We're going to be talking about what do buyers look for when they're looking at buying a business, and buyers can be all different types of buyers, right? But I think for the most part, 80% of what they're looking for is usually very similar, I would think. And so while you represent kind of the private equity space, I think it's safe to say that types of things that you look for in a business aren't too dissimilar than the types of things that a lot of other buyers are going to look for in a business. And so with that as our kickoff here, I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little bit and maybe give us an idea on kind of how you came to the position you're in now. And if you could talk then from there and go into the slides, that'd be all right.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Yep. As you said, I am an alumni of UNI, and I went there and graduated with an accounting degree and a finance minor. So you can probably go to the next slide. So I started my career in accounting and started at what is now RSM and previously McGladrey, and kind of worked my way over to the finance side in private equity as I am today with Midwest Growth Partners. So I took a semi-unconventional route, but I'm happy with where I'm at, and we have a lot of exciting things going on at Midwest Growth Partners today. So I will tell you that my slideshow, a lot of it revolves around explaining what private equity is, but then I also will dive into, towards the end, all the things that we look for as buyers. And as you said, I think is pretty similar for all different buyers.
Perfect.
So I appreciate the intro, and I will kind of dive into what is private equity and what buyers are looking for.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Perfect. I think. So I'll let you go to the next slide. So generally speaking, I would say there are several different asset classes that individuals and institutions have to choose from. So as you'll see with this slide, it ranges from cash, equity, fixed income, real estate, and commodities. And the sector that we are involved in is essentially a pool of money or a fund that is used to buy and sell private companies to make a return for investors. And these investors likely have different objectives, whether it be just diversification or whether it's achieving community investment objectives, rural investment objectives, or another. One common objectives for all of our investors is they're obviously looking for a return. So no one is giving us their money for a donation. And the investors have several different private equity funds to look at, and each one of them has a different strategy or thesis, and they have to pick one that matches their objectives.
Okay. Yeah. What kind of criteria do you usually? I mean, is that risk-based? Is that geographic? What kind of objectives do you typically hear from investors?
Yeah. So I'll dive into a little bit, which is a little bit early, but kind of Midwest Growth Partners. So, we're a lower middle market private equity fund located in Des Moines, Iowa, one of the very few private equity funds in Iowa. So a lot of our investors are geographically surrounding us in the state of Iowa or Nebraska.
Okay.
And so they're looking to partner with somebody who's local, who they can, drive a reasonable distance to and meet. And a lot of these companies have a vested interest in, I would say, smaller companies in rural areas, exceeding and expanding and growing.
Okay.
And that is a similar thesis that revolves around what our fund is built on. So our first fund, Fund One, was a $41 million private equity fund, built on the thesis around succession plan liquidity, mostly around family businesses, and growth capital for backing management teams as they look to grow and expand.
Yep.
And generally speaking, we're looking for companies with free cash flow between 0 and 5 million, and revenue between 4 or 5 and say 60 to 70 million in revenue.
Okay.
A lot of other private equity funds are bigger than us. We are one of the smaller private equity funds. So we are generally speaking looking to be the first institutional money into a company, as opposed to other firms and other private equity funds, which look to be the second, third, or fourth institutional investor in the fund. So we are looking for smaller family-run businesses in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, that we think we can add value to.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Okay.
So yeah, and the one thing I will say, we're still on this asset class side, is the private equity industry has evolved immensely over the last 2 decades. I had a slide that I presented in another scenario a couple of months ago, and it talked about the public companies versus private equity funds or private equity investment companies. Back in like 1998, it was like significantly all public companies and very few private equity backed companies. Whereas today that is becoming more merged, and there's actually a lot more private equity backed companies today than there are public companies.
Oh, wow.
So it's the line has crossed, and the number of public companies is actually down from the late 90s when we had the .com
Sure.
boom.
Yeah.
And private equity backed firms were relatively a new thing in the early 2000s, and there are a lot more. And we, generally speaking, are one of a very few private equity funds in Iowa. So one of our thesis is that there is an underserved market in the upper Midwest for companies, family-run companies between 0 to 5 million. If you are a New York-based private equity fund, you will probably, fly into Cedar Rapids or Des Moines and take a car if a company is big enough. But if a company is not above, say, 5 million in free cash flow, they're not willing to do that. So we're trying to take that company and build it into a bigger company that strategics or larger private equity firms, kind of bridging the gap between these good, solid companies, family-run companies in the Midwest, and the next level of institutional investment or strategic buyer.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
So go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, this is what we were kind of just talking about, some of the distinct differences between private equity and public companies. Public investors are generally speaking passive, and they, hire proxy in their board of directors, who then go down to management. Management a lot of times have some compensation, but with private companies, we're really viewing this as a partnership with management. So we are partnering with the operators and backing them in their growth objectives.
Okay.
And so, and one other comment I would say, because in my prior life, I was back with a consulting firm, and we worked with public companies, and it is very expensive to be public. So, people come to us and say, our goal is to be public, and there are a lot of great companies out there that are not public. It's an expensive deal with Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley. You have to have a lot of people on your staff working on compliance, or expensive lawyers. So being private is not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay. All right. Cool.
So here just kind of talks about some of the goals and objectives that we had kind of talked about earlier. So some of our investors, we do have institutional investors in our fund that we are accountable to. So we may have to not be able to use the local CPA firm or the local next door lawyer. So that a lot of times is a byproduct of us using more regional firms, because we have institutional investors that we are reporting to, and we have guidelines that we must follow.
Okay. And when you say attractive rate of return, I'm sure that's in the eye of the beholder a little bit, but can you put some parameters around what that looks like, especially, as a, how
Yeah.
do you define?
Yeah, so there are different funds out there that do either traditional debt or mezzanine or mezzanine debt or equity firms. So our firm is an equity firm, and so we are higher risk and seeking higher returns. So I would say the general stock market has give or take been around 10%. When we go into investment, typically I've modeled it to the high teens or the low 20s. Um, and I would say that that's where we go in shooting for on our investments, and that's pretty consistent with other firms of other similar firms, other similar private equity firms. So debt firms may be a little bit lower in the low teens. Mezzanine may be around 15 to 16%. Typically, we're modeling out to 18 to 25% return on when we go into an investment.
Okay, okay.
And just kind of talking through, you can go to the next slide. So, this kind of shows. So I would say there are, as you will see on this chart, there are angel investors and there are venture capital. So you'll see venture capital in the middle of this slide.
Yep.
Venture capital are looking to make 10 investments and probably hit one home run, maybe two home runs, and that'd be great. And the other 8 to 9 are gonna fade away.
Right.
Generally speaking, on private equity, we're investing in companies that have had steady, consistent cash flow and cash flow over the years. And so the way I put it is, we are not looking to hit home runs. If we hit a home run, it's probably by accident or something great happened in the macro economy. We're looking to hit a lot of singles and doubles and a few triples in our fund. We hopefully will have no strikeouts, and but we also, as opposed to a venture capital firm, they know when they make 10 investments that they're going to have a couple strikeouts. So it is a different investment thesis and strategy.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense.
This just kind of shows, the general transaction process. So typically, either a individual is represented by a business broker or a investment banker, or they're representing themselves, just like selling a house. And this just kind of talks about the process of the transaction, and it also gives some examples of private equity firms and bankers, and as well as companies. So there are probably a lot of companies out there that are private equity backed that individuals do not realize are private equity backed, because it's you wouldn't think that McDonald's had ever been private equity backed, but there are these large private equity groups, which we are often compared to, like the KKR and Blackstones, but they have a completely different thesis and a completely different strategy than us. It's kind of like we are competitors, but really, if we sat down at a table, we are doing a completely different thing than they are.
Okay, perfect.
So this just talks a little bit about the fund structure of what a private equity fund is. So, we have our limited partners who essentially give us capital. So we have a capital call line. When we decide to make an investment, I write up an investment memo, kind of on our thesis behind the investment, and then we call capital from them. So when we say we have a $41 million private equity fund, that means we have a pool of $41 million to call at any time. So that kind of just shows what the fund structure looks like. And then the general partner would be our office here of personnel that are making decisions and running the companies on a day-to-day basis. So we have 2 managing partners who are deal guys, and we have myself, who's an associate, and then we have 2 operating partners who actually work within the companies that we buy. So this just kind of shows the general structure of how a private equity fund looks.
How common is it for a firm to sell to a smaller private equity fund like yourselves? and for you not to infuse yourselves into day-to-day management, if that makes sense? Are you ever a more passive investor, or are you always a very active operating investor? And maybe not
So
specifically, but your industry in general?
yeah, I mean, I would say it's a case by case basis, but generally speaking, I would say we look at significant minority or majority investments,
Yep.
um, and so we sit on the board slash control the board on the majority of our investments. And actually, that's a good segue. A lot of the companies that we invest in, they do not have a board in place pre-close. In post-close, I would say we lay out a roadmap on here's kind of what we think is going to happen, and it's kind of like a budget. And a lot of companies, hey, they've ran year over year, and they don't even create a budget because they know that they're going to do about what they did last year. And we come in to create a roadmap or a first 100 days, first 6 months, and kind of manage the company board meeting to board meeting. We usually send our operating partners in to implement strategic initiatives, whether that be a new ERP system, a new accounting system, the expansion into a new site, or opening a greenfield location, which we've done at our different things. But what we typically say, and people get worried about, is like, these guys are going to come in and breathe down my hair. And what I would say is that we create a budget. If they're hitting their budget or exceeding their budget, we're generally not there on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week or a month-to-month basis. We just sit down on the board meeting and act as a sounding board for them. People who we look at deals, I look at deals every day. So we have M&A experience. So I may look at a company and say, man, I can see some different best practices that are being done on this company that we could implement on our company. And I'll summarize it into a long email and send it over to them. And they'll read it and say, I got something out of that. But generally speaking, I'm not talking to our management teams on an hourly or daily basis.
Okay, just curious. Yeah, thanks. You want to cover this now, maybe strategy?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, this kind of talks a little bit about what our objectives are when we make an investment. So we're generally looking to professionalize or institutionalize the business, which it says in the middle. So we're looking to recruit talent. So I mean, I generally say that we are trying to make money on the exit and not on dividends and the interim cash flow. We want cash flow to go up so we can continue to take those dollars and invest it back in and growing the business. Which some companies out there that we invest in, they have been just harvesting the cash and stockpiling it away. However, that's a recipe for not achieving long-term success, because if you're just taking all the money out and you're not investing in new technology, new talent, new infrastructure, you are setting yourself up that somebody's going to pass you. So there's a balance there, and we're generally looking to take those dollars and invest it back in to grow a bigger, better, more robust entity that is ready for the next buyer. So this just kind of talks about, it says over there, engage professionals. So, we may hire a consulting coach or a strategic coach to come coach the VP of sales. And that may be something they wouldn't have done in the past because they wanted to, as this is an incorrect term, but they were penny pinchers, and, they would take the money out and they didn't want to make those strategic investments, where we want to invest in the people. So we know that the company can only go as far as the people can take them. And so we want to make sure, another thing on that is we go in and provide an independent analysis on the people, process, procedures. So, I would typically say we are not there to come in and cut people, but if we come in and say, in my independent view, I think this person fits better over here in the entity, or maybe we need to bring in a stronger controller, or we need more sales talent, which is a common thing amongst all companies. We're going to come in and make those assessments. Usually that's at the board level and saying we want to make these investments on X, Y, and Z. But I would not say, people are often worried, they get the term private equity and they're worried we're going to come in and make a bunch of cuts or move the location. Our investors gave us money to grow these small companies in the locations they're at and add employees. So I would say that we have a pool of capital that we are putting there. We are hopefully investing in their company for them to meet their growth objectives. And so we often, one of the questions we ask when we sit down with management is, I give you $2 million. What are you going to do to grow this company so it is twice as big? And try to get their reaction on how they're going to grow and see if there's alignment culturally and on strategy.
Okay. Cool. You want me to move on? Or?
Sure.
Okay.
So this just talks about, I've kind of already brushed over this, but who is Midwest Growth Partners? So we focus on 4 verticals: food and ag, manufacturing, business services, and distribution and logistics. And then kind of talk about the different transactions. So I would say typically we're looking for succession plan liquidity on family-owned businesses, but we also provide management buyouts, which would be fit in the same category. Also, sometimes when I use family-owned businesses, sometimes there's a lower level of management that wants to buy out the older level of management.
Right.
And we go in and, we deem those guys, whether it's 2, 3, 4 individuals that are there that we believe in, we will go in and back those people and give them the funds. Maybe they could go to the bank and get $1 million, but the upper level management thinks it's worth 5. So we will provide the $4 million additional equity that's required because it's a small business, and help them achieve the transaction and then hopefully grow into a bigger equity stake. So we may create a incentive package that over the period, maybe they each own 10% to start. And our vision is that if they hit these growth objectives, they're all going to have 25% by the end. And then we're going to provide them capital to help grow, whether that's through organic growth or M&A growth.
Okay, that makes sense.
That kind of shows you a general area on the top of the geographic area we like to invest in. We do not have a restriction, but we generally think that the people in that area are very similar to us culturally. So one of our distinct advantages is both my bosses drive trucks. They can drive up and talk the same language, as opposed to somebody from New York City who flies in, is wearing a 3-piece suit, and is driving their Mercedes into location, and they may not see and talk the same language. I would generally say that we are not those guys.
Sure.
And so culturally we can, there are a lot of situations where the management tells us before we get there, hey, we wear jeans here. Don't show up in a suit. And, we are perfectly fine with that, and we'll wear jeans and go in and meet them. And we feel like we culturally are more aligned. However, we do a lot of times make add-on investments. So we may make a platform investment in a manufacturing facility, and then look to make smaller add-on investments in all morph it into one investment. And those do not necessarily need to be in the Midwest. Maybe we want to expand our platform in whatever manufacturing it may be into one of the coasts. And so we make a tuck-in investment and tuck in the product line or tuck in the talent pool or whatever it may be.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Matt.
Let's go ahead to the next slide.
Okay.
So this also talks a little bit about our strategy and some items that we've already covered. So we are looking to make equity investments. I would say our average check size is probably around $5 million. We have on the slide that it's 0.5 to 7 million, which I would say we would definitely entertain anywhere in that range. We are flexible in whether it's minority or majority or an outright sale, which we have also completed.
Okay.
We talked about our criteria already. And then, most of, at least our 2 managing partners have have sat in the seat of making CEO, CFO level decisions. They have ran companies before, so they have operating experience, and obviously our operating partners, if they're not doing it today, they have as well. A lot of times they'll go in and serve as the part-time COO of a company for 6 months while we look to bring on a stronger COO. And so they'll go in and fill that void for a short-term period of time. But we have made those decisions and sat in those seats, so they can talk to the owner eye to eye, as opposed to just a finance guy who's sitting in a cube in New York.
Yep, sure. Oh, I get you. Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay.
So this just talks a little bit about the investments that we have made.
Oh, okay.
So these are 3 companies that we are currently invested in. And we talked about location. So the first one is a value-added distributor in the Indianapolis area. And we actually have merged this company, and we still retain equity in a company in Chattanooga. It was a bigger company, and we felt like we could get more sites. So we grew it 25% the first year we owned it, opened a greenfield site in Charlotte, and have since merged it into a company out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Our second company is out of Kansas City, which is a branded dermatology product company that we made an investment, I believe, in 2016 or 2015. And the bottom company actually is a good example of a company that we bought in and have already taken an exit. So this is a Market Fresh Produce. Would be a company where they wanted to make investments and they did not want to use their own capital. So we provided them some growth capital to make investments and kind of hit their objectives. So we call this a second bite of the apple. So we provided them some capital, or the owner some capital, and we went out and we executed on that strategy. And to be frank, it grew faster and better than what we thought, and more profitably than we even thought, than we modeled. And we were only in the investment for 24 months, and employee count, revenue, and bottom line had more than doubled in 24 months. And actually, we had people knocking on our door asking about the company. And when we got in, it wasn't quite big enough for a lot of private equity firms. And when we sold it to a bigger private equity firm, which is also located in the Midwest. And I would say, if you wanted to know, how did the owner, how was he affected, and how are the employees affected? The owner essentially had a sounding board to make decisions. He was kind of a one-man show before our investment. We put a board in place. We kind of probably forced him to do some things that he should have done in the past, building talent around him, building a management team to help handle that growth, putting in, more executive decision makers where he could push down some of the authority. I would say he's very good at his job, but being able to pull yourself out and working on the business rather than working in the business is a big thing that we preach, and something that happened in that investment. And I would also say, it adds more structure. And we also executed in a few acquisitions while we were there, at least one. And we obviously took that all upon ourselves. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. So we took the whole M&A side, and we handled that, and then just essentially effectuated the transaction, and then helped him with integration. And then obviously on the exit, we helped talk through and think through the exit as well.
Okay.
And the employees essentially had capital to help meet the objectives that we had in place. So I would say that we grew employee count, which it more than doubled, and we expanded. We added 2 sites. So the employees essentially had a company that was more flush with cash to grow. And, they had kind of a new company per se when they had a financial partner in place. I would say we did not cut in any employees, but sometimes if a company is a lunch pail employee and they want to show up and work 9 to 4 and the company is growing, 25%, those employees may get weeded out through the growth phase. But that's just the natural course of a company growing and going through its next phase of growth.
Okay, okay.
Go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, so these are also some of our other, sorry, go back one. These are also some investments that we've made. The bottom two are actually legacy investments that one of our partner and a couple of his actually our two operating partners, our one managing partner made prior to the fund opening. So our fund opened January 1st of 2014. And those investments were made prior to January 1st, 2014, and have kind of rolled in as legacy investments. The top investment would be our first investment out of the fund. And that would be a situation where the owner passed away and it was transferred down to an estate. In that transaction, we actually heard about from a financial advisor in town, and actually that's a business just outside of Des Moines. It'd be a small family business, had been in operation since 1978, great product, small employee base of under 10 employees, something that we thought that we could build upon, something that was scalable. And we have since brought in a new CEO with experience that from a bigger entity, and we've made an acquisition in Cleveland, Ohio, and that company has seen a lot of growth over the last 24 months.
Okay.
And we think there's a bright future going forward. So I would say, something about what we look for in our investments. I would say first and foremost, we are looking to partner with operators, and so we are evaluating the people, but we also want good products and services as well that the companies have. And we have something, this may be internal, but does it pass the Amazon test or the Google test? So would Google or Amazon have any reason, or would they want to take out the company that we are buying, or could they? So is there a protective moat that could keep the business in operation? And so if a company is not adding a lot of value through their products or service, if they're not value add, we don't typically make low margin investments in low margin commodity type products. I'm not saying we wouldn't, but typically that's something we do. And I would also say we like companies that are very focused. So what are they doing good, or what are they doing great? And how focused are they? If they're changing, if one day they're manufacturing a water bottle and the next day they say, I think I can use the same plastic and create this new thing. And we're like, well, what happened to your idea on the water bottle? And they're like, well, it's old news. And then they move on to a new thing, and they do that every 2 years. Generally speaking, we would consider that owner to lack some focus. So we like very, very focused entrepreneurs. Not saying that we couldn't diversify into a new product class or diversify end markets. Those are great things, but you can be focused and also complete those tasks or objectives.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about from the current owner's perspective and how they might deal with private equity from the standpoint of the exit for them? And are they typically getting cashed out 100% up front? Are they typically having to do some earnouts? How do you?
Yeah, so we typically do not do earnouts, but that's partially a byproduct of the fact that we have a fund that we need to deploy. So I would say we do a quasi earnout in the fact that our owners typically are partnering with us. They're taking some chips off the table, and the fact that we write them a check for, say, 70% of the business, they roll equity of 30%, and then we say, if you hit 15% growth in X EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation, so essentially free cash flow. If you hit X growth with X EBITDA, we will pay you this bonus of whatever it may be, 50 grand or 100 grand or whatever a fair number is. And so that isn't necessarily an earnout in the sense, but it's a incentive-based incentive-driven compensation. So say their fair market salary is 200,000 or 150,000, and then we have some sort of incentive comp tied to it. That would be pretty normal for our investments. So we preach a second bite of the apple. So we're partnering with these operators. We are not running the day-to-day operations. Typically, we're partnering with them. They roll 30%. We are giving them a financial partner or a pool of money to help them grow and achieve their growth objectives. So a lot of times it's a fresh start. So we're giving them some cash, letting them take some chips off the table. But then the real upside for them, a lot of times, so the second bite of the apple, we always say, let's just say for simplicity, it's a $10 million transaction. They take $7 million off the table today. They roll $3 million into the new entity, and we triple the company in 5 years. It's worth $30 million. So their 30% of $30 million is $9 million. And so their second check that they got is bigger than their first, which was 7. So we talk about they only own 30% of an entity, but they own 30% of a much bigger, larger, more robust entity. And so they may own a smaller smaller piece of the pie, and their second cash out may be bigger than their first.
Hopefully. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the goal. And I would tell you the slide before that we looked at Market Fresh Produce, that was the case there. And he's on his third bite of the apple. So he got his first bite. He had a second bite on when we collectively took the opportunity to sell to a larger private equity fund, which we obviously got his buy off on and walked through the numbers and the whole situation holistically with him. And his second check was bigger than his first, and now he's on his third bite. So now he has rolled equity with the new private equity fund, and his goal obviously would be to get a bigger check every time.
Sure. Okay. Do you when you mentioned buyout of a family, I think that's where a lot of our clients are coming from. Is maybe an older owner operator who is looking to get out of the business.
Yep.
And in a very traditional, clean, I'm done in 6 months, excuse me, type of way. Are you an option for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that not only are we out there looking for new deals, but we're also looking for operators. So we are building a pipeline of companies to go look at, but also building a pipeline of executives to run these companies. Whether it be a guy who, was at a bigger entity and he didn't like the corporate dynamics of working there, bureaucracy. So he stepped away and now he's looking to find his next venture and he wants to write a check in to help grow and be a part of it. We're actively trying to find those people just like we're trying to find the companies to buy. So I would say that it could be a little tougher. Obviously, most of our discussion today has been around partnering with the operators, but that could be we're partnering with an operator who we already have in our pipeline for a company that's a family-owned business that is looking to sell 100%. So Inland Coatings, we purchased 100%. We had an executive ready to go. He's subsequently got equity in the entity, and we now consider him partner with him. But we've purchased 100% of that entity, and the add-on we completed in Cleveland, also a family-owned business in Cleveland. We purchased 100% of that entity. And I can tell you I was there for close. That company has been also, very ironically, also started in 1978. And the father started it, passed it down to his kids. His kids were actively involved. And there's a lot of emotions that go with selling your business. And it's not just as getting a check and,
Right.
selling. I mean, that's your livelihood. And so I was there for the week of close, and they don't maybe believe us that we're gonna keep the operations relatively the same post close. We plan on keeping on all the employees, and until it actually happens, until we do what we say we're gonna do, people are very unsure, and they're thinking this is a big private equity firm who's gonna come and uproot us back to Iowa. And I would say that, since that we closed on that October 31st, and there's a lot of uneasiness right around close. And I think we've done exactly what we said we were going to do. And I think it's a fresh start for their employees. We are there to help them grow. And maybe the older family business, this may not be the appropriate word, but it's the owners may be a little tired. And they may still be interested in selling their product and very passionate about their product, but maybe they're not interested in HR and firing and hiring people. And we can say, hey, we're going to take your business, and the first hire we make is going to be somebody who's going to take over those HR responsibilities. We'll put in extra cash so we have the money to go hire that person who can do the hiring and firing, and take that off of your plate so you can work on what you like doing, which is selling your product and being passionate, going to trade shows, whatever it may be. Okay. So it kind of re-energizes the entity. We're not trying to put restrictions on them. We're trying to put them in a position to succeed.
Sure. If they succeed, you succeed, obviously. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I would say just on that, we talked about partnering. When we go in and we are buying 70%, there's a lot of negotiations that go into any deal, but we always tell our operators during these negotiations, we can't win unless they win. There is no winner or a loser. If they win, we win. If they lose, we lose. So, okay. These negotiations, there may be attorneys involved, and there may be, heated topics on one or two issues, but generally speaking, that's our partner. And, a partnership, if the person has positives or negatives, like an investment banker, they may sell their client. We are partnering with somebody, and once we close, we own that entity. So this may not be the right term, but it's almost like marriage in the fact that if your wife has a flaw or two, you have to live with it. If our partners have a flaw or two, we can't just pretend it doesn't happen. So, we are trying to build on their strengths and filling in their weaknesses with whether it be new personnel to help, whatever it may be. But we are buying a partner. So we are not selling a client.
Okay. So Matt, could you talk a little bit about the types of, criteria that you're looking at when you're looking at a business to buy? What are the signals that, this is a good one type of thing?
I think it's kind of having a value add, really understand the person, the owner understanding what they do well, being focused on who they are and where they fit in the marketplace, is big. And does it have a protective mode against the Amazon or Google's? A lot of private equity firms have specific metrics around revenue growth or gross profit or negative net income growth. We don't necessarily have that because a lot of times we're investing in family-owned businesses that are very consistent, and our goal is to go in there and help them grow and kind of changing the culture into a growth-oriented culture. Mm-hmm. So unlike some of the other private equity firms, which may have specific criteria of it has had to have grown 8% year over year for the last 4 years, we do not have that. We are looking for consistent businesses that have over 4 to 5 million in revenue, that have some sort of free cash flow typically, and that we think is scalable. And we think if we go in and make X, Y, and Z investments, we're looking at the company thinking backwards. So we say, where can this company get in 5 years, and how do we work backwards to get there?
Okay.
So I don't think we have any specific criteria outside the fact that we don't make investments in insurance or banking or technology or typically healthcare. Those would just be that there are other private equity firms that fully focus on banking, or other private equity firms that fully focus on healthcare. That is not our niche. Our niche is more what I would consider meat and potato businesses in manufacturing, distribution, food and ag.
Yep. Okay. A lot of what we have here in Iowa.
Yep.
Okay. How about from a standpoint of, from when an owner's getting ready to sell, do they are they, I'm guessing it depends on the size of the firm. So let's say those firms that are going to be valued less than uh, $3 to $5 million or somewhere in that range. Are they typically having representation work with you, or are they working with you directly? How does that work?
Either way, so the deal we had in Cleveland, we got introduced by a broker who essentially knew that that company fit with our company, but he wasn't very involved with the actual diligence process. So we have nothing that stipulates we have to go through a banker or through an investment banker. And I would say we're probably 50-50. 50% of our deals go through bankers and 50% do not. The ones that do not, there are nothing wrong with them. I would say they just typically take longer, because I would say a banker's job is to take some, what I would say, weight off of their shoulders in helping them gather the info and putting it together and in a bow and to us. And that's what they're paid to do, to help facilitate and shepherd the process.
Yeah.
So if that person is not there, it definitely does not mean it's not going to get done. But we know that these business owners have a business to run. And so if they're running a business, which is a full-time job, and then getting diligence requests for us, that's a full-time job as well. So then they just have two jobs. And we obviously tell them we want them to focus on running their business, because we don't want any decline in business before. I mean, our diligence typically is 60 or probably 90 to 120 days. So it's 3 to 4 months is how long diligence typically takes, and it could be longer if you're not working with the banker, because we're going to analyze the performance. So during that diligence process, we're trying to check boxes on legal documents, employment agreements, and a lot of the companies are small that they don't have employment agreements, but insurance, we're going to diligence insurance, we're going to diligence the numbers, etc. And it may sound like we're diligencing a lot of stuff, but keep in mind that we have institutional investors that are giving us money, and we are stewards of our investors. So we are essentially trying to go through, and our goal is to know as much about the entity, not the product or the service, but as much about like generally the entity as the owner does. So I can write a 20-page memo that we give to our investors that here's our thesis behind this and this company and what our plan is going forward.
Okay, that makes sense. I think you touched on this, but could you talk a little bit about, so as opposed to if a buyer was going to sell, or if a seller is selling to you versus a key employee group or some other third-party strategic acquirer or otherwise, time horizons might be different in terms of, key employees obviously are buying to hold and keep their employment and that kind of thing. How long do you guys look to keep a firm, and in general, private equity in general, how long do they look to keep a firm before they want to spin them back out and that kind of thing?
So I would say typically private equity is going to tell you 3 to 7. We're typically, we say 5 to 7. We're trying to go in and professionalize and institutionalize the business, and hopefully make some, whether it be acquisitions or internal strategic investments. And those do not happen overnight. Those are, we are not oblivious to the fact that it's going to take a while to put a new accounting or an ERP system in. So we are not a finite holder. We are not a forever holder. So we have a finite timeline that we have to operate under. And so, our typical hold period is 5 to 7 years. It could be a little longer. We have a 10-year fund. So our fund opened in 2014. So our investment could be, right now, if we made an investment, I think we'd still tell owners 5 to 7 years, because we have a 2-year window that we can add on to our 10-year fund. And our next fund is actually a $100 million fund, which is an RBIC, or a rural business investment company, which means we'll be looking to make a little bit more rural investments. But back to your original question, we're 5 to 7 years. I would say it's strategic. So if you want to get my sales pitch on this, a strategic may tell the company that they're going to keep them in their current spot, but they have, they probably are going to try to consolidate a lot of operations. So, which is, perfectly normal and smart probably on their part because they're consolidating accounting and purchasing and maybe production. And so a lot of times they're going to tell you what you want to hear on the front end on a strategic, but they're going to uplift their operations and move it into where they're at. And so we're looking to keep that. So let's just say it's in Monticello, Iowa. We're looking to keep that business in Monticello, Iowa, and trying to triple the employee count. So, we have no, typically, unless it's an add-on, we have no other place to move it. We don't, we likely aren't going to try to move it to Des Moines. Typically, if you look at all of our investments to date, we've kept them where they were before we bought in. So we're keeping them where they are, and we, just like Market Fresh Produce, we doubled the employee count there in 24 months. That's our goal.
Okay, that's good to know. Let's see here. Go ahead.
I think you had sent over a question to me about if someone was preparing their own pitch book, what would need to be in it and how polished it would need to be.
Yeah, that's a question we got from somebody. Yep.
Yeah. So I would say we look at 225 deals a year. So if I get something, we look at 225 deals a year. We're looking to do 1 to 4 deals a year. And we actually have 3 deals under LOI right now, which means that we are in the 90 to 120 diligent 20-day period to close those transactions. So we're very busy. We already completed 2 deals this year. So we have 3 more that are all supposed to close around year end. But anyways, if we get a sloppy presentation from somebody, I'm probably going to put it on the bottom of my stack. It doesn't mean that it won't be looked at, but it may lose some credibility, get put bottom of the pile. But some of the things we're looking to see is basic things like who are they, what do they do, why do their customers choose to go with them, or what are they great at, where do they fit in the market or amongst their competitors. We're going to want to see a few years of historical financials, revenue, gross profit, net income, capital expenditures, so what they're spending on equipment, probably the owner's salary and involvement are going to be important, especially to smaller businesses. We understand typically, one of the questions I often ask is if the owner were to go to Florida for 3 months over Christmas, what happens to the business? Does it go down? How many calls a day is that owner taking? Basically, how reliant on the business. If that owner per se got hit by the beer truck, does the company survive? And then the other question, and a lot of times is, if we were to say, hey, here's $2 million for you to grow 30%, well, how are they spending that $2 million? And just getting their mind thinking about 30% growth in a $2 million pot sitting on their balance sheet, and trying to just see how they react to that. Okay.
Any final thoughts or advice that you might have for a potential seller if they're looking at a private equity as an option for them? Or if they maybe have some hesitations about private equity?
Well, I would say that private equity's got a bad rap because there are the Bain Capitals that are buying huge companies and going in and stripping fat. I would say the companies that we're buying are very lean. Typically, the owner sees every dollar coming in, every dollar going out, and they're looking at the bank statement 4 times a day. We typically are going to add costs because we're going to go in and we want to bolster up the management team so they can handle that growth. So we are a different type of private equity with a different thesis. And so, we oftentimes, when we're getting ready to buy a company, provide references to our other, the CEOs or operators of other companies to know, it's just like any industry. You want to know what you're going to get because you are getting a partner, as I was kind of talking about earlier. So we want to know them to know what they're getting into. And when we ask all these questions, we're just trying to figure out what they're getting into. And you said parting thoughts. One thing I would say is the market is very the M&A market is very hot right now, and there's a ton of baby boomers coming out. And so right now is a kind of a bad time to be a buyer or a private equity firm, but a great time to be a seller. So I wish I was sitting on the other end of this phone to an extent, because it's a good time to sell, and a tough time for us to sit here and run models that produce 18 to 22% IRR, like I was talking about earlier. But if we buy a company and don't grow it at all, we are not going to achieve 18 to 22% IRRs, and we are not going to have people giving us money to invest in our next fund. So we are a resource and sounding board for our owner operators, and we are here to be, to help them grow. And, we want to find people, I said we look at 225 deals a year. We want to find people that we can partner with and help them grow. If they're scared to grow, then it's probably not the right fit.
Sure. Okay. No, that makes sense. Does the owner, I got one more question that came in here. The owner of a lot of our firms is looking to walk away and not necessarily be involved in that day-to-day operation anymore. So the question is, when you're talking about you want to see growth going forward, obviously the company doesn't have to be growing at that kind of a rate right now, then, correct?
Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, most of our investments, the companies kind of what I would consider reach an inflection point where they've kind of reached a point where the owner. So a lot of times I would say the guy who took it from the family member who took it from 0 to 10 million may not be the person to take it from 10 to 20. And so we may make an investment in the company knowing we need to bring in the CEO who's good at taking the company from 10 to 20. And the owner may be looking to walk away, and we just need to find that guy that can take it to through its next phase of growth. And that's completely understandable. And like I was saying earlier, the company does not need to be achieving that level of growth today. That is, a lot of the companies we have, I would consider them, their owners maybe are tired, are looking for a change. They're ready to move to Florida and, sit on a beach, and we need to go in and find a way to help them grow 15% a year. And they need to worry about, having their next drink on the beach. And, we need to find that next leader. And, the one thing I would say to prepare themselves for a sale is it's a year-long process. So if you want to sell, if you want to get the maximum value out of your company, if you started right now, it's going to take you 6 months to get ready and 6 months to sell, maybe, to run a full process. And so if you're right now saying, if you're just now making the decision, the sale, if you want to get the maximum value, I would say you're probably not going to sell until 12/31/19. And that's 6 months kind of getting somebody under you ready to take over your role. And there's a few months of gathering data and, getting everything, I would say, put together. And then typically you're hiring a broker, a banker, who's going to put together a book with all the information on your company. And then there's going to be an auction process where you send it out to private equity and strategics. Then you get offers in, and then you go through a 3 to 4 month diligence process. And now it's 12/31/19.
I gotcha. There's a lot going on there to get all the way through that. Okay.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, one of the first speeches I give when we get a company under LOI is the next 3 to 4 months are going to be tough getting all the diligence requests. I mean, private equity is probably different than somebody who's just looking to buy a job per se.
Yep.
We have our bosses are our investors, so we have institutional investors that we report to, and so we have stuff that we have to do, as opposed to if you're buying a job, you have to answer to yourself and yourself only.
Yep, I gotcha. No, you're called upon to be more of a steward, so I get you. Okay. Well, Matt, I think maybe it doesn't look like we got any more questions, so maybe we'll wrap up there. I thank you so much for your time, kind of giving us a little bit better, I think, understanding on what maybe, like you mentioned earlier, with private equity is something that has quite a few negative stereotypes around it at times, and maybe just a lot of misunderstandings as well. So I appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk through things a little bit about how you approach things, and what buyers are looking for in buying a company. I think it's also a little bit of good news for our clients here who are, now knowing that maybe now is a decently good time to sell based on valuations and deal flow and whatnot. So I think that's a nice little early Christmas gift for some of them to hear. So appreciate your time, and if anything further from you, otherwise I'll sign us off. Okay.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate the opportunity. And on this page right now, you'll see our website, which is www.mgpfund.com, and on there you'll see our profiles. And I believe on my profile, Matt Sargent, you'll see my email address. So if anyone has any questions on anything I said today, or wants to reach out about their business, I'd be more than happy to field those questions, or we'd love to see more opportunities. So, or if you have a friend who's thinking about selling their company in a couple of years, we'd love to hear about that. And I, again, thank you for the opportunity to get on here, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Matt. Have a great rest of the day, and of course, go Panthers, right?
Yeah, absolutely, go Panthers.
All right, take care.
Yep, you too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.